Hello, and welcome to another episode of Apparel Pixels, Adobe Illustrator podcast for fashion and accessory design. We're going to start where we left off, looking at these two rectangles, and we're only going to spend another 5 minutes on this portion, as we'd like to get into actually drawing something in this episode. So, just to finish up where we left off from, I'm on the selection tool. I have my two rectangles, and the thing I'd like to go to next is just basic copying. And of course, you have the basic copying functionality of utilizing Control C, Control V, but in Adobe Illustrator, I generally like to control where my copies are placed. And in doing this with Illustrator, it makes it quite easy for me. First, we already discussed how when we move an icon or an object in Illustrator, it shows me its origin, its origination point. So when I'm moving it, although it shows me where I'm moving it to, it doesn't actually move it until I let go. What I'm going to actually do in this instance here is I'm going to make a copy of this rectangle by simply selecting it and moving it. And I'm going to keep it aligned. I can generally just place it where I want and do the copy function. What I want to do is keep it aligned. So at the same time as I'm moving the object, I'm going to hold down the Shift key. The Shift key is used as your constrain key. It really helps me to keep things in a certain perspective and lock things in a certain angle. What I'm doing by holding the Shift key is it locks it in this straight angle here. It also gives me the 45-degree angle, and it gives me the horizontal and vertical angles as well. And as I'm holding that Shift key down, when I'm ready to copy, I'm going to add the Alt or Option key, depending on whether you're using a Windows PC or a Mac. So as I hold down the Alt or Option key, I will see that double arrow appear, and when I let go of my mouse first, what happens is it makes the copy, and then I let go of the keyboard, and my copy is produced. It's a very easy way to kind of control where your copies are going to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the same functionality in terms of apparel by looking at it from the perspective of doing a button. And in doing a button, I will probably use the ellipse tool. And a quick way to get to the ellipse tool would be using the letter L on your keyboard. L automatically takes me to my ellipse tool, which is behind my rectangle tool. So if I go to M, which is my rectangle tool, and I click down and hold on that rectangle tool, it will show me all the other shape tools behind it. And as you can see, as I hover over the ellipse tool, you see the letter L in parentheses. It's actually telling me what the quick key is for that tool. Now, all the keys don't have a quick key assigned to them. You can basically go and assign keys for certain tools, and I'll show you that later on. But from this perspective, I'd like to just quickly jump to that ellipse tool by holding the letter L, and I'm going to again use this constrain key. As I click, hold, and drag out a circle or an ellipse, I'm going to add Shift to that while I'm dragging it out. You see how it snaps to give me this perfectly round circle? I'm just going to basically define how big I want that circle, let go of the mouse first and then the keyboard, and there's my circle. Now I'm going to jump to the letter V for my selection tool, and I'm going to process the same copy functionality. However, I'm going to actually take it one step further and add some new functionality to that. So while I'm selecting this ellipse tool and I'm moving it down, again I'm going to add Shift to lock it in perspective, and then I'm going to hold down or add the Alt or Option key to that to make my copy. Now the great thing about that is this is no different so far than what we did with the rectangle tool. However, this next step I'm going to do will give you a little more functionality in being able to do things like buttons or snaps. Now let's say this is center front and I'm copying this down. I'd like to keep that same distance, and also I'd like to keep it aligned to my first two buttons. So what I can do is use a functionality that Illustrator has that allows me to take my actions and do them again. It's called Transform Again, and it simply remembers what your last action was. So if I hold down on the apple, it's Command and then tap the letter D. On PC, it's Control and tap the letter D. What it will do is continue my last action as long as I keep tapping the D while holding down that Command or Control key, it will continue to make the copies down using the same distance and keeping it aligned. And it's a great way to actually do buttons. So even if I had the button better designed with a rim around the outside and the buttonholes and the stitching in between, I could just select all of those pieces, all of those objects, and do the same function and copy it down my shirt. Now, finally, to get us off of this, what I'm going to do is clear up my page a bit. I'm going to jump to the letter A. The letter A takes me to a new selection tool, which is my Direct Select tool. As you can see now in my toolbox, the white arrow selected, and if I hover over it, it actually tells me what the quick key is in parentheses. Now, it just takes a little time with remembering what keys to what keys correspond to which quick keys, but as you start to use it, you can push yourself by saying, okay, I'm going to remember the A. It's for the Direct Select tool. So whenever I want to go to it, I'm just going to tap the letter A. Now with the Direct Select tool, what I'm going to suggest is, in the beginning, to get used to it, just hover it over one of the areas where you know you have a point defined. In this instance, if I hover it over my rectangle, it actually shows me, and this is as of CS, I believe it's CS3 that came out with this, but what it does is when you're over a point, that point actually becomes expanded to clearly define that you're over a point on your object. And that's what it's doing for me now as I move over my point. It's clearly defining where my point is. At the same time, if I was using a previous version of Illustrator, I would get a little white box or a little hollow box at the end of my Direct Select tool to indicate that I'm over a point as well. And if I click once, what happens is, if you see in this area where I selected, that point looks filled in. However, the other points of this object are not. And what that is telling me about this Direct Select tool is that it's actually selecting the point that I clicked on. And in doing so, I can then click on that point and move it where I see fit. And all the other points pretty much stay where they are. Now, and using that same tool, I'm going to say, or take it from the instance of saying, I'd like more than just one point. So instead of clicking on it, I'm going to use the selection window by holding, and dragging over the area where the 2 points are that I'd like selected. So when I let go, basically the 2 points that were within that selection window are now selected, and I can then move those 2 points, and the other points stay exactly where they were defined. And the last part I'd like to add to this is just making sure we clarify some things, because this can be an issue for some users. What they tend to do is they like to click on an object, and what happens is when you take the Direct Select tool and you click on an object that is filled, then you really didn't define a point. So the Direct Select tool actually takes the initiative of saying, okay, well, since you clicked on a filled object, I'm going to fill in all points of that object. And what it's going to act like now is it's going to act as though that entire object is selected. And rightfully doing that, it's doing it basically because all the points are selected. So you can actually move this as though it was a selection tool. Now, I don't want you to get into this habit, because I don't want any confusion about what the purpose of this tool is for. The purpose of this tool is for directly selecting on an individual point or points, so that you can actively move those points or transform them in certain ways. Okay, now we'll come back to that in later episodes. What I'd like to do is I really would like to not waste time and get us right into drawing, since this is our 4th episode of this Adobe Illustrator functionality for fashion and apparel. So I'm just going to simply select all my pieces by hitting Control A or Apple A, and I'm just going to remove them by hitting the Delete key. And what I'm going to do is bring up a template. Now this template I'm going to bring up, you can download from apparelpixel.com. Basically, it should be a link within the blog that consists of this lesson. So when you download it, just download it, save it to your computer, and it's already predefined and set up for you. So all you need to do in this instance is go to File, New from Template. And I'm just going to navigate on my computer as to where my file would be. So I'm going to simply click on this, and I'm going to look for Adobe Illustrator, and the file should be called to Mac, Adobe Illustrator, and my file would be called practice drawing. So you see how it's .ait? That stands for AI template. So I don't have to do anything but hit new, and it's already going to come in defined as I set it up when I created this template. Now, this is a good practice drawing because it actually gives you a guide as to where to place your points. And we're going to be using the most feared tool in Illustrator. That's known as the pen tool. And it's the pen tool because it drives some people absolutely insane. The great thing about this lesson is not only is each point numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through point 7, the blue lines indicate where you are going to drag out what's called your handles. And I'm going to explain that to you in the way of how this works. Now, in using the pen tool, I'm simply going to hit the letter P. The P will give me the pen tool. Now, I'm going to explain some things about the pen tool before we actually get started. The pen tool looks like a fountain pen with the letter X next to it. If you do not have that icon indicated as far as the fountain tool with the letter X next to it, then we're going to check a couple of things. The first thing is we're going to look and see if you have cap locks on, because cap locks changes it to an X, which is considered to be a precise cursor. It's still the pen tool, however, it's using a different method in terms of the icon and how you select. I prefer the fountain pen because it's the thing that I've known to use since I've been using Illustrator, but if you ever do see this instance, just check and see if you have cap locks on. Also with the pen tool, we're going to be aware that there are other tools behind the pen tool, same way it was with the shape tools. And what I mean by that is, let's first look at the way the pen tool works. It's a series of points, like connect the dots. All right? I click once to define where I'm going to start, I move my pen out, click again, and it starts to form that line based on the points that I define on my page. And we're not doing curves right now, I just want you to understand it. Okay? So the first thing I want to point out to you, and hopefully you'll be able to see it in this lesson, is two things I want you to notice. The first thing is, if you look at my line, you'll notice that all the points are hollow, except for the last point. The last point, what that's telling me right now is that this is the most active point, and that's where I'm going to continue from when I click to my next position. The other thing I want you to notice is that as I'm drawing, you see how this is filling with the color white? It's filling with that because I didn't define before I drew to take out the fill color. Now I can still do that if you are familiar with the quick keys, and this is a little more advanced, so I'm going to try to break it down for you, or maybe we'll just skip it for another lesson. I'll say it and then we'll focus on it more in lessons after this. But what I'm going to do is use my X key, and as you can notice on my toolbox, that's switching me from fill to stroke colors. And I'm going to jump to my fill color, and then I'm going to hit the /, well, where my question mark key is, and that will remove the color. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to not get off of the pen tool. However, I can still remove the color, and the benefit to that is this. The pen tool is a commitment. It's like meeting someone and you decided, hey, I'm going to date you for a while, or I'm going to date you until I finish fulfilling this commitment of trying to see where we go with this. When you're on the pen tool, you're going to use that pen tool until you finish your complete thought. So if your purpose of doing creating a sketch is to draw half the drawing, you're going to continue to use that pen tool until you complete half that drawing and do not click on any other tool. Okay, so let's get right into actually drawing with this tool. With the pen tool, before you start, make sure that you have your no fill selected and you have a black stroke. I'm simply going to start at point 1 by just moving over the star where point 1 is, and I'm just going to click to put my first point down. Okay, now you won't see it too well, but as you, because of course I'm using a template that has a lot of things covering that point, but I'll define it better in as we go along. Now, going to point 2, there's going to be a curve on my neckline. And again, just in case I didn't indicate this, I'm starting on the outside silhouette of my drawing. So I'm starting on the back neckline of this t-shirt. Okay? As I go to point 2, I know that I'm going to need to curve that line. So when I click at point 2, I'm going to keep my finger down on the mouse as I click, and then I'm going to simply drag out what's called my handles. Now my handles are what help me define the curved lines. As you can see, my line is moving all over the place, and the great thing about doing a curved line is it basically forms as you're doing your handles, so you can see where you want to place it, and there's a benefit to that. Now, as you get used to it, you'll understand where exactly to drag your handles out to get the line you want. And the way that works is simply as this. From point 1 to point 2, I have a curve that goes up in the direction of point 2. And what I'm imagining it is if that curve was to continue, it would simply go straight up in the direction of where I dragged out my handles. And that's the method I'm using now to define the perfect curve I'm looking for. Okay? So, I'm now at the point now where I need to go from point 2 to point 3. And in doing that, I'm going to explain something a little bit about my handles that I've created. Okay? What happens with my handles is this. As I dragged out a handle in this direction, it created a handle of the same distance in the opposite direction. And here's where the confusion comes. My curve is really defined by the handle on the bottom. The handle on top is really defining where I go to next. So here's the challenge. If I go to point 3 and just click, what's going to happen is my line is going to actually come up and then curve down. And that's because this handle is telling it to come up when it's dragged out in this direction. So what I would need to do before I go to my next point is get rid of the outer handle. Now Illustrator makes this very simple for you as you're drawing, because all you have to do, if you know that that's going to happen, you need to move your pen tool over your last point, and an icon is going to present itself, and I'll explain that icon in a minute, but it's going to look like what's known as a convert anchor point icon. And I'll show you what it looks like in a little bit. It looks like a little pointer at the bottom of your pen tool. So when I click, my outer handle goes away, and then when I go to point 3, I get that straight line right down to point 3. Now in this lesson, I purposely put a slight curve on the sleeve in order to help us better understand how to do our handles. So when I come to point 4, I'm going to click, hold, and drag again. And the same method is going. I'm going to drag in the direction that curve is going in. And I've lined handles up so you can line the back of that handle up in that line exactly. And when I let go, it's a very slight curve, but again, you see the same principle applies. The handle is dragged out. Now, if I was going to point 5, I'd have to adjust this handle in order for me to get a straight line down to point 5. So in doing that, I simply know that I need to get rid of this handle. I move my pen tool over this point, and there's the icon I'm looking for. You see next to the pen tool, I have that little pointer. That's what I'm looking for. So when I click, it gets rid of the outer handle, and I can just simply click down on point 5. Now, to continue on, I'm going to use my quick keys to zoom out. It's Control minus, and of course to zoom in would be Control plus. And the Mac, it would be Apple minus, Apple plus. The reason I zoom out is because this is a pretty smooth curve. It goes in and comes back out, and there's nothing else weird about it. And in doing that, I know I want to drag out a handle to get that curve, but I know that my handles are going to be fairly long, so I actually zoomed out in order to allow myself enough room to drag out a pretty lengthy handle. So that way my page doesn't jump up or down on me. So when I come to point 6, it's click, hold, drag out the handle, let go, and there's my curve. Then to go to from point 6 to point 7, I simply need to hover my mouse over point 6, click once to get rid of the outer handle, and in this instance I'm going to use my constrain key. If you remember correctly, your constrain key is a shift key, and the shift key is used to do a bunch of different things. But what it will do for me in this instance is it will make sure my points are aligned between 6 and 7. So even if I'm drunk well, of course I'm not drunk, but even if I was doing this with a hangover, who knows, and I clicked a little bit below 0.7, it would still line that up because I held down that shift key. Okay? And it's, if you think about it and relative to time, realistically, you can get around this in no time. This t-shirt is pretty simple. So what I'm going to do now that I've gotten half of this drawing out of the way is I'm going to jump to my selection tool and just deselect. And this is what I'm going to advise at the beginning until you get used to how to use these tools and we get better at them. Now I want to process the action of copying my shape to the opposite side, which is going to be called a reflect command. So it's going to be a reflect and copy to the opposite side. So I'm simply going to process that by, once I'm on my selection tool, by selecting the object I want to reflect. Then I'm going to activate the reflect tool by hitting the letter O. There's the reflect tool that shows up. As you can see, my cursor has now changed to a crosshair. And what it's showing me when I select the reflect tool is it's saying, here's a reference point of how you're going to reflect this piece. But I don't want to reflect it from here. I want to reflect it from the center line. So I'm going to go to the center line. Before I click, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and then click on the center line. That's going to give me my reflect options. And all I want to do in my reflect options is say I want to copy from one side to the other. And that's how simple it is to actually get the copy from one side to the other of my drawing. Now, my next episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the process for joining an object to complete for one complete shape. There's a reason why I'm stopping here. It's because there's a lot of quick keys involved in this. There's a simple way to do it, and then there's a more efficient way to go about it. Right now, just know that you copied it from one side to the other. This side is now separate. It needs to be joined and to make one complete shape, and then we'll take it from there. Hello, welcome to another episode of Apparel Pixels, Adobe Illustrator for fashion and accessory design. And today we're going to pick up from where we left off in session number 4, where we've sketched out half this t-shirt, we've reflected and copied it to the other side, and simply all we're going to do now is understand the process for joining and copying, joining these 2 points. And here's what I mean. You have 2 points at the top and 2 points at the bottom that need to be joined to create a complete shape. So in actuality, what you're looking at is something that looks like this. Here's one line, here's another line, okay? And I purposely did this for the purpose of this lesson. Now, here's 2 points, and this is what I mean by 2 points. Here's one, here's the other. And I want to join those 2 points. Now, in selecting individual points, if you remember from our previous lesson, the correct tool would be the direct select tool, because that's the tool to select individual points. So what we're going to do here is we want to be able to select the 2 points that need to be joined. In doing that, the best way to select these 2 points is not by clicking on them, but by simply knowing how you've drawn this, and know that if you use the selection window, it will select the 2 points within this window. And if you remember how you've drawn it, then you know that there are only 2 points within the selection window. So when I let go, the 2 points that are selected are filled in, and they are these points here. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of things about this. In the beginning, there is a quick method to joining that a lot of people learn, and it's simply going to your Object menu, go down to Path, and you select Join. Now, and it's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just in the essence of how you'd like to perfect your drawing. What the join command does is it sees your 2 points and it actually places a line between the two. So what happens here is now I still have my 2 points, but I have a line between the two. So if at any point I have to edit this area, I have to match up these 2 points so that they line up or form a point if it's going to be a V-neck. Right? And it's nothing wrong with that. In the beginning, you can use the join command. What I'm trying to do is make things better downstream for my users. So I'm going to actually go back and look at a different option. Now, there is an option that actually does the same thing, except it changes it a little bit. What it does is says, I don't want that line in between. I want you to take those 2 points, join them, and just make it 1 point. So the long way of going through that is you would go to Object, Path, and go to Average. Average does something where it takes the 2 points and it basically places them one over top of the other. So it's going to ask you when I select Average, do you want to join horizontal, vertical, or both? We want to join both. Just think of it as both points and hit OK. And you will see both of those points come to a meeting place. Then if I go back to Object, Path, Join, it's going to react a little bit differently. It's going to ask me, hey, are you joining smooth or corner points? Now the only difference here is if I'm doing a smooth point, it's going to add more points in that join to allow it to be smooth. If I'm doing a corner point, it's basically going to say, hey, I'll just add it and drop one. And that's what we're going to tend to do. Even if it's a curved line, we're going to say corner point. So when I hit OK, what it does is it joins it. But if you notice now, it joins it as 1 point, as opposed to putting a line in between the two. Okay? Now that's important to note because what we're about to do is utilize that on our body. So here's the letter A for the direct select tool. Here's the area for the 2 points I want to select. And what I'm going to do now is instead of going to the menu option, I'm going to show you how to do this in a quick key, but it'll probably be the most keys you've pressed at one time. Reminiscence to Alicia Keys playing one of her hits. It'll be like your fingers all over the keyboard. Basically what it is you're going to hold down Control, Alt, Shift for the Mac, and it's Control, Alt, Shift for the PC. So it's Apple Alt Shift for the Mac, Control Alt Shift for the PC, and then with your other finger you're going to tap the letter J for join. What that does is it automatically does the join by corner, or remembers your last join command, and it drops one of the points. And in doing that, the only way you're going to know you've done it right is by looking at your control palette. On your control palette, you will get an icon that represents a reference point. Okay? That reference point is the only indication you have to know that you've done this correctly. So when I go to the bottom to do the same thing, I simply grab the area where the points are. For me, it's going to be Alt, Command, Shift, J, and there's my reference point icon. Now, important to note that this functionality only works if there are only 2 points that are selected. Any more than 2 points, you will get a message. Now, I'll show you some instances where you have issues with joining 2 points, and one of those would be when you're not used to using the pen tool. You simply will click, decide, oh, I didn't want that, jump to something else, and think that little point that you put down is gone, and that's the case that I want to clarify right now. That point is still there. If I hover over this area, use my direct select tool, and select this area and try to join, I'm going to get that warning message that I told you about. It says, to join, you must select 2 open endpoints. If they are not in the same path, they cannot be on text path nor inside graphs. And if both of them are grouped, they must be in the same group. So it's a lot of rules to this that you need to understand. What the major problem is, if I zoom into this area, is that extra point right there is in this selection. If I have any of these mysterious little points here, it's not going to allow me to join. If I delete that point, and I do this now, it's going to give me that icon that indicates that I'm doing this correctly. Okay? Practice that little lesson about joining, and what I'll do is I'll finish this up by showing you different methods for working on the interior of this sketch. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.